Welcome to As a Woman, Fertility Hormones and Beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Crawford, and I am a board-certified OBGYN and fertility physician, and also co-founder of Fora Fertility in Austin, Texas. Each week on this podcast, I discuss health and fertility and how they relate to your true self. Become a part of the community of collaboration that amplifies others as a woman. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome back to the As a Woman podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Crawford, and today we are talking all about the what next. So many of you call and leave amazing voicemail questions, and one of my favorite things to do is to answer your questions. And on today's version of What Next, it is, I froze my eggs. What next? And I realize this is a relatively new problem for a lot of people because egg freezing was experimental until about 10 or 11 years ago, meaning there's now a whole generation of women who had the opportunity to freeze their eggs who previously didn't have that. My generation, for example. All of us were never in the position to have to figure out what is the best plan to use the eggs, what does it mean for our current age, for our family building, and the whole spectrum. So today's episode, we are going to be answering one of your voicemail questions and making a deep dive into it. If you have questions, you can always call the As a Woman voicemail at 657-229-3672. Again, that is 657-229-3672. And we are going through your voicemails, grouping them together for episodes, and some really fantastic questions might have an entire episode dedicated to them, just like this one. Other ways to get your questions asked can be to ask on Instagram at nataliecrawfordmd every Monday, and you can sign up for the newsletter at nataliecrawfordmd.com/newsletter. We answer questions in the newsletter, we do exclusive content, and a lot of fun updates. As for Instagram, you will find questions answered on Mondays, answered on other podcast episodes pulled from Instagram. And it's just a great way also to see if there's any content that exists for some of your questions. You can also go to the website at nataliecrawfordmd.com/resources and you can sign up. It's free. Type in any PCOS or endometriosis, IVF, embryo transfer, egg freezing, and you can see everything I've ever made on it, whether it's a podcast, a YouTube, a blog post. So no matter your favorite style of consuming content, I'm here to help educate you. So without any further ado, let's dive in.
Hi, Dr. Crawford. Thank you so much for all the educational content you put out. My name is Gabriella. I'm 39 years old. I froze 9 eggs 3 years ago when I was 36, and I would like to use those eggs now because I'm married and I'm ready to have kids. My question is, what is the right protocol in this case? Can I thaw the eggs, fertilize them, and place a resulting embryo straight away, assuming I get at least one? Can I do all that in the same cycle while the embryo is fresh? I don't think this is the same as a fresh transfer because I'm not transferring right after egg retrieval, and so my hormones are not elevated, but also I don't necessarily want to freeze the embryo. I want to use it right away, and I'm not worried about testing the embryo in this case. So I don't know why, but this is not covered anywhere clearly. All the fertility clinics talk about either fresh or frozen transfers after egg retrieval, but so many women are encouraged to freeze their eggs when they're younger. So I just want to know what is the best and fastest protocol for using those previously frozen eggs to make and transfer an embryo. Thank you so much.
All right, there's so many good questions as it comes to egg freezing, and I'm going to take this in a few different directions and give you my overall thoughts. First of all, I'm so glad that you froze eggs. A few years ago, you've kept an opportunity open, and this allows us to have a bigger discussion about what might be best for your family. As we walk through, I'm going to go through one approach and then talk you through some of the questions you asked and some bigger questions that I ask my patients. I think it's important to start with saying at age 36, having 9 eggs frozen is really great. However, it is low for your age. So most people who are at age 36 would have had more than 9 eggs frozen. And there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. Not every cycle is perfect. We learn a lot about your body, but it does bring up my first question to think about anytime we're in this scenario. Was that a reflection of potentially having lower egg reserve? And if so, why? Is there an underlying problem that could contribute to your infertility? You don't have any proven infertility, but we would hate to miss a red flag. And further, how does that impact your entire family building process? And some of the nuance here might be thinking about, was that the expected outcome for that cycle? Because we can't compare everybody to averages, but was that the follicle count your doctor counted? Was that in line with your AMH? Or was this maybe an unexpectedly lower result than they were thinking based on your values? In this scenario, 3 years later, it's a little bit better if you just had an unexpected lower response than we wanted and your numbers were all better than that, because it makes me less concerned that there could be something underlying. It makes getting fewer eggs less of a red flag or a warning sign, because if your egg count was low at age 36, then I'm worried. Do we have autoimmune disease? Do we have endometriosis? Have we been exposed to something? Is there something genetic going on? And of course, those are questions in a much bigger picture. On the other hand, if it was just a less than optimal response, but your numbers were good, that doesn't have any bearing on your long-term health or your potential success rates when it comes to a transfer or to other things. So that's the first thing I want to point out. Remember that anytime we talk about averages or odds, which we're going to do a lot in this episode, average by definition means that some people do better and some people do worse. So if you're not average, that's okay. Not everybody's going to be. It doesn't mean something is inherently wrong. It doesn't mean that your doctor or lab is terrible, but it does mean we need to make sure we're not missing some other underlying factor. More than anything, averages give us a road of expectation because we need to know what this journey may look like. What we'd expect for average for somebody who's 36 freezing their eggs, if you have an average egg count, I would expect closer to about 14 to 15 eggs to be retrieved in that age range. Again, multifactorial. When it comes to using them, let's break down the process of using them and where we go from there. And before I do this, I just want to share something about egg freezing. So recently, one of my friends posted on her social media, Dr. Heather Irabanda, a link to her Substack where she explained why she did not freeze her eggs, which I think is so important and really underlines the importance of making the decision that's right for you, which in my opinion comes from education. You need to understand what it is and what it isn't. You need to understand your body, your goals, and then you can make the choice versus letting time make the choice for you because you did not have the knowledge base that you needed to make an educated decision. But I digress because on her post, somebody came in the comments and said, "Thanks for covering this because I've always heard that egg freezing is just a scam." And that really got to me. There are some false claims. Let's go over them. But egg freezing is not a scam. It has actually changed the lives for many people. It has opened the door and allowed opportunity for family building at later times. It has saved fertility for people who might have endometriosis, cancer, a variety of genetic conditions. Truly, truly, it is a lovely technology. But it is not an insurance policy. That's one thing that I hate that people say. I will have an appointment at least once a week with a patient who will say out loud, "I want to freeze my eggs because I want to have an insurance policy on my fertility." And I get it. That's what you might hear or other people say. And it sounds like, yeah, I'll just freeze them now and then I can use them later. But importantly, an insurance policy pays out. If you have car insurance and you get in a car accident, your car insurance is going to cover some costs. If you have house insurance and something happens to your house, same idea. That is why we purchase and pay for insurance. That is not what egg freezing is. It's not an insurance policy on your fertility. It's an investment. If we compare the money that you're paying for your insurance to the money that you're putting in the stock market, Should you invest your money? Should you put it and invest it and let it grow in the market so that you'll have more money in the future? Almost everybody you talk to who knows about finance is going to say, absolutely, that's a great strategy. That can allow you to have more opportunity later for what you put in now. What you put in now can go further later. However, the ROI on that investment is going to depend on so many factors that we don't know now. The environment of the market when you pull the money out, things that we can't predict. There's always some level of risk that that investment is not going to pay out the way you want it to. But on a whole, it is considered a good and a smart thing to do because for the majority of people, it's keeping a door open. In the same way, that's what egg freezing is, in my opinion. It's an opportunity. It's keeping a door open. It's giving you choices where otherwise you might not have them. It is not an insurance policy. It is not a guarantee. Yes, if I rewind the clock back and it is 2014 and egg freezing is hot off the market, there were definitely older women freezing their eggs because suddenly they had the opportunity to when they didn't previously. And the older you are, the harder it is going to be to have success from egg freezing because the number of eggs you're going to need is going to be so many more. Further, the technology has gotten better, which is great, but the freezing process we use now has a 90 to 95% survival for each egg. But when it first rolled out, it was closer to 40 to 50%. So yes, there was a swarm of people who first underwent egg freezing 10 years ago, had an older technology. They were at an older age. They didn't have many eggs. They were told the rhetoric that it was an insurance policy, and they were largely let down and disappointed. And you can read those stories. That is not the experience of what egg freezing really is today. And if somebody's counseling you that it's an insurance policy on your fertility, find somebody else because that's not how this should be pitched or sold. I don't sell egg freezing. I discuss it. We talk about odds. We talk about strategy, family planning, how you should view this, who's it good for, who's it not. As you get older, any eggs you get in the freezer, no matter the number, is a potential opportunity that you otherwise might not have. And that is the truth about what egg freezing is. If we think about an egg, it's a single cell. That single cell is mostly filled with water and then DNA. And the egg is held in a stage of cell division called metaphase of meiosis. And if you think back to biology, metaphase is when your chromosomes meet in the middle, they are lined up and they're held apart by meiotic spindles or proteins. And just like the rest of our body, as we get older, we're exposed to wear and tear and toxins. And our cells absorb that. We get wrinkles and back pain. We age. And that aging inside our ovaries manifests in two ways. One is going to be a decrease in the genetic stability. Those meiotic proteins are going to degrade and they're not going to hold the chromosomes in their perfect spots, so that when the egg is then splitting and going to be fertilized by sperm, the longer the egg's been sitting in your body, the increase in the genetic abnormalities. Fertility success is number one determined by age. That doesn't mean age is everything. That doesn't mean people can't have success older, but your age is a huge component. After that, it's going to be environment, lifestyle, toxins, exposures, inflammation. So you can still make a big difference even if you are in these older ranges. Number two, the eggs that you have remaining, you start to run out of them. You're born with all the eggs you're ever going to have. And if you're new here and you haven't heard my analogy, every month I like to think about you have a group of eggs available. And I like to imagine all the eggs you ever have as in a vault inside your ovary. So from that vault, an entire group is going to be sent out. And from the group, one egg will be chosen to ovulate. The rest of the eggs will die. And the next month, another group. However, as we get older and the vault gets emptier, the vault will then send out fewer eggs. The vault doesn't like to be too crowded or too empty. So when it's really full, it sends out more eggs. And as it gets emptier, it sends out fewer. That is very important because whenever we're doing IVF or egg freezing, I can only get the eggs that are outside the vault to grow. I am limited by what your body is giving me. Now, we have protocols and combinations of medications, and what we're trying to get those to do is to override that body's natural desire to release one egg. So I'm trying to get them all to grow, not just one. But what those medications cannot do is tap into the vault and get more eggs to come out. I cannot make that happen. All right, so neither here nor there, but a little bit of a background about what egg freezing is and what it isn't. So when it comes to this situation, and we have 9 eggs from age 36. 9 eggs a little bit lower than we want, but still good. Age 36, about half the eggs are going to be genetically normal. That number is going to drop. So when we're 38, it's going to be about a third. When we're 40, it's going to be closer to 20-25%. When we're 42, it's going to be closer to 10 to 15%. So the older we are, the lower the percentage of genetic normalcy. And that is why for Gabriella, she did herself such a favor by freezing her eggs at 36. As compared to where she is right now at age 39, she would likely have to do 3 times as many cycles. One cycle is getting 1 month's group of eggs to get the same results she got at age 36. So fantastic job, Gabriella. Let's just roll through what happens in normal percentages if we're thawing the eggs, and then we're going to get to some of the nuance when it comes to transfer. Number 1, not every egg's going to survive the freeze thaw. Let's presume 90% are going to survive. So if I have 9 eggs, I'm now going to go thaw them. I have 8 that survived the freeze thaw, and we're all happy. From there, we're going to go inject 1 sperm into each egg. And when the eggs have been frozen, they've been stripped of the outer cells, which are called the cumulus, and that's actually what the sperm attached to. So anybody who's undergone egg freezing now will have to have ICSI or intracytoplasmic sperm injection for fertilization. And that's fine, that's relatively standard. That means I'm going to look under the microscope, pick a good looking sperm, pull it up into a pipette, and then inject that sperm into the egg. And I say I'm going to do it, but no, an embryologist who is so trained at micromanipulation is going to do this, and it's fascinating. It's so cool to watch. Because we're doing ICSI, the sperm counts don't have to be super high, which is wonderful, but sperm plays a huge role. It's carrying half the genetics, and those sperm genetics have to kick in to get the embryo to that blastocyst stage. So, word to the wise, sperm count is not testing sperm function. Sperm count is telling us how many sperm are being made, which is related to hormone level, but sperm motility and sperm shape are often associated with lifestyle factors and some things that we can have influence over. But neither of those things are telling me about the quality of the DNA inside the sperm. And the reason why I quickly bring this up is I have had some patients who say, yeah, my partner got a sperm count, it was great, so felt like they had excellent rockstar sperm. They go to thaw those 9 eggs that are so valuable, and they fertilize them with sperm, and then the embryos all stop growing around the day 3 stage, and they never make it into the blastocyst. And then turn to find out male partner is smoking marijuana every day or has some other exposure that we know is associated with a decrease in the DNA quality inside the sperm. And we took your one chance with these eggs from a younger age and we fertilized them with sperm that was by far not the best. So I wouldn't play by normal rules when it comes to this, meaning heart-to-heart talk with the sperm source in the situation, really making sure that it's not I passed my sperm test, so now I'm free to go be crazy and expose my body to everything. Sperm do grow every single day. The sperm lifespan means that in 3 months from now, you can have a totally different new group of sperm. And that's great because it means short-term changes now can make a huge difference later. But in this scenario where these 9 eggs are so precious, let's really try to make sure that we're decreasing inflammation to the best of our ability. We're putting our absolute best sperm with those best eggs from 3 years ago. presuming nothing's crazy and our sperm is great, now we go take a sperm, inject it in an egg, and normal fertilization is going to be about 75 to 80% with ICSI. So of my 9 eggs, 8 survived the freeze thaw, 6 have now fertilized with sperm, so we're doing pretty good. From there, half of the 6 are going to make it to the blastocyst stage. So the blastocyst stage is a day 5 or 6 embryo. If we think about this, the egg is typically released and it's captured by the fallopian tube, and it must be fertilized within 24 hours. From there, that embryo is going to go from a 1-cell embryo into a 300-cell plus blastocyst. So it's going to rapidly grow and divide. By day 3, it's only 6 to 8 cells. So think about how quickly it's getting to this really multicellular blastulated cavity, which I like to think about as a soccer ball, where all the cells on the outside are going to be that placenta, and inside is mostly hollow. It has fluid in it, but you get the point. And inside that is a tiny little cluster of cells that actually is what becomes the embryo. Huge growth, short amount of time. Half are just not going to make it, even if everything's awesome. So now we're at 3. That's 3 at the blastocyst stage. And Gabriella, I know you said you're not interested in genetic testing, but for the sake of the experiment, we're going to go down that road. If we do genetic testing, this is when we would do it. We would take a few cells from that outer cell layer, the blastocyst, which is called the trophectoderm. That is the cell type that becomes the placenta. We would then freeze the embryo and send those cells off for genetic testing. Genetic testing can mean a lot of things. Pre-implantation genetic testing is testing the embryo before it implants. The most common type is called PGTA, pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy. PGTA is telling us, does this embryo have the right number of chromosomes? Is it missing a chromosome? Is it having a duplicate chromosome? PGTA is not telling us about single gene disorders like cystic fibrosis or a carriers of BRCA gene. That absolutely can be tested. Different process, requires a specific probe to be made for that chromosome because we have to amplify the DNA out. And that is typically called PGTM, or for monogenetic disease. PGTA is what people talk about when they say genetic testing, genetic screening. As we said earlier, at the age you were when you froze the eggs, we would expect half of them to come back normal. So we've made it down to 3 embryos. So if I now send out testing for those embryos, I would expect 1 to 2 to be normal because I can't have 1.5. So maybe 1 out of the 3 is normal. One single genetically normal embryo that is implanted is now going to have a 65% chance of live birth, which is fantastic. It's not 100. It's kicking butt of natural conception. Natural conception rates at age 36 are going to be about 11 to 12% per month. Natural conception rates at 39 are going to be about 5% per month. Those are for rates if you're just starting your first child, you don't have other children. So 65 sounds awesome compared to those numbers. We're also going to have a decrease in miscarriage chance if we do genetic testing versus at our age naturally. You're always tied to the age of the eggs, which is good and beneficial because at 36, we'd say that's about a 25% chance of a miscarriage. If we're at 39, that number would be much higher. It's going to be closer to 35% chance. So take home message is that 1 embryo, which would fall real normally from 9 eggs, we'd be happy to have 1 genetically normal embryo, is going to have a 65% chance of live birth, which means we may not have success from it. If the first one didn't work and now I transferred the second one, I have a cumulative live birth of 88%. That's great. And if I had a third, the cumulative success rates after the third are 95%. Now, it's unusual in this scenario that all 3 would be genetically normal, and your live birth rate with an untested embryo is going to be less than 30% at 36, which is a pretty young age, but that is reflecting that the same 3 embryos, whether I know which one might be normal or whether I don't. So the math evens out at the end. It's not wrong to not test the embryos, but it's not giving you as much information. And I think that's just a part of a bigger discussion. If you potentially want more than 1 child, then absolutely there should be a different conversation. Namely, 1 embryo is highly unlikely to make it into 2 children. it can happen because you can have identical twinning. That is not probable at all. And your odds of getting pregnant later after you carry a pregnancy now are going to be so much lower. And there's another strategy, whether it's should you try to get pregnant now? Could these be a second baby? And a strategy I see very often, because you're already having to pay to thaw, fertilize, and get to transfer, could be to consider another egg retrieval. Even though we're older and you might not get as many eggs and they might not be as good of a quality, ultimately you're putting more embryos into the testing process and have a higher odds of having more normal embryos. If you were going to do that, I would highly recommend genetic testing at age 39. So that's a different discussion. My take home here is that if you're hoping to have more than one child, these 9 eggs are highly unlikely to fulfill that goal. And we really need to strategize out what might make better sense. As to your question about a frozen transfer or fresh transfer. Okay, if you're going to do genetic testing, which Gabriella, you said you're not going to, but if you were going to do genetic testing, we absolutely would want to freeze them, because most genetic testing platforms have to take time to come back. So we would thaw the eggs, fertilize them, grow them, test them, freeze them, wait for the samples to come back, and then we would line up a frozen embryo transfer. Advantages to the frozen embryo transfer is namely timing, knowing that we're putting the best embryo in, either by genetics or based on synchronicity of the embryo and the uterine lining. What do I mean by that? When we're planning on an embryo transfer, we transfer the embryo on essentially what we like to consider day 5 of the embryo. So your uterine lining prep is going to match up with a day 5 embryo. However, some embryos take 6 days to get to the day 5 stage. And I don't know on day 5 when I need to put an embryo in your uterus because your uterus is ready based on the amount of progesterone you need. What if you don't have any day 5 embryos? What if your best embryo, it needs another day to grow? What if it looks bad on day 5? The next day, the better one looks great, and then we're freezing that, which you're not really expressing interest in wanting to do. And even if you don't test them, it's going to be hard pressed to have somebody want to put more than one inside. 2 is probably okay if they're not tested, but what if there's 3? They're not all going to be able to go in. That is really off the standard of care. So there's a bigger discussion of strategy with that. And so by allowing the embryos to get to day 5 and day 6 and then freezing them, essentially in a frozen cycle, we're able to then synchronize the lining because we're starting progesterone and then we're thawing the embryo on the perfect day. So we know they're lined up. Remember that progesterone opens and closes the implantation window. We do not have flexibility once you've started progesterone. So on the downside is that you're starting that progesterone, trying to synchronize and get your uterus lined up, and we don't even know if there's going to be an embryo to transfer. So you might have to go through monitoring, pay for medications, be going through a cycle, and you might be in a position where there's no embryos that could survive. So technically, it's a little bit more challenging because we have to coordinate the uterus and the embryos together. We may not be transferring the best embryo. We aren't going to have genetic testing results if we wanted those. And we don't have much flexibility if things don't look great. You're also committing yourself in that scenario to doing a controlled or a medicated cycle. And that's a whole different discussion that I have episodes on, and I don't know our full scenario here. A controlled medicated cycle is an artificial uterine prep. It can be really advantageous for autoimmune disease, possible endometriosis, or adenomyosis. However, a modified natural cycle where your body is ovulating and making your own natural progesterone is also a really great option for some people. But because I don't know when your body's going to ovulate, I can't time that with thawing the eggs to grow them out, and it's not an option. So you are limiting your availability of the transfer prep you can do. And if the eggs are fertilized and they grow out and then we freeze them, we can later do whatever protocol type we want. So in short, what you're asking is not wrong. Could we do it all in one fell swoop? It might result in not having an embryo to transfer. It might result in paying money and taking medications that you don't need. It is narrowing you into one specific protocol type that might be or may not be the best thing for you. It is not allowing us to do genetic testing, which could be advantageous. And it doesn't allow you to have the data on what you really have from that group. So the last thing to point out is I just gave the theoretical example where you should have 3 embryos sent off for testing if you were going to test them, and you were going to have 1 genetically normal. Maybe 2 if you fell on the good side of the odds. If, however, you may want more than 1 child, you could be in a position to have 3 embryos, untested, transfer 1, get pregnant, and feel really false reassured that you have 2 others in the bank. And those statistically are not going to give you another child based on the age and the odds, because they're not all going to be normal. And you don't know that information, and you're not going to be of an age where you can intervene after you go through this pregnancy. So it is just lack of total information. You might not know how many embryos even are frozen because they haven't gotten to that day 6 stage yet. I always love to say you can't make decisions on data you don't know. So I think it's just a bigger discussion about when. Was your egg count low or not? Because does that reflect some underlying problem that you need a specific protocol for or you need to investigate? 2, what is your goal? What's your family goal? How many kids do you want? What is your real honest thought and game plan here? Number 3, what is our opportunity to intervene to add more eggs to the mix if we're trying to shoot for that goal? Number 4, what embryo transfer protocol really makes the most sense for us? Are we willing to spend more money in the process if we don't have an embryo to transfer? And we don't want to be transferring a non-synchronized embryo and uterine environment and having a lower chance of a success rate. Embryo freezing itself has come such a far way. Even though I said egg freezing has a 90 to 95% chance of survival, which is incredible if you've been in the field as long as I have, embryos survive the freeze thaw. We'll quote you 99% of the time, but it's closer to 99.9% of the time. Embryos are just so much stronger. Think about it, 300 cells versus that 1 single cell. They really do great in that freeze thaw environment. And to add extra reassurance, there's no data that freezing an egg, thawing it, growing it out, and then freezing it again as an embryo, and then thawing it and transferring it does not change outcome, does not change chance of success, does not increase the risks. So you should feel comfortable if that's the choice you want to make, that you're not risking harming the embryo by doing that. I just want to say, Gabriella, thanks for asking your question. Really well thought out, and I hope that this provided you a little context and color for why we don't often talk about doing a quote-unquote fresh transfer. And it is still a fresh transfer because the embryo is fresh. It was never frozen. It is not quite as clear-cut as not doing it because of the high hormonal environment, but it is some context of really having a good understanding of what you have, synchronizing the embryo, the uterine environment, embryo transfer protocol, and financially, does that make sense for your potential scenario? So love your question. You guys, please call and ask more questions and ask them on Instagram. So every Monday at nataliecrawfordmd, you can ask your questions in the question box. Some will be answered there, some on our other podcast episodes, and some in the weekly newsletter at nataliecrawfordmd.com/newsletter. You can also check out the resources page on the website and the courses. The Enhance Your Natural Fertility course is just my heart and soul poured into it. And if you're undergoing IVF, and the IVF guide is just nitty-gritty details for IVF and embryo transfer that if you have 4 or 5 hours is just my favorite thing to really get into the weeds if you're undergoing that stage of the process. Should be bought with the Natural Fertility Guide, but it can be bought alone. And if you'd like to call and ask your question, I would love to hear it. 657-229-3672. Again, 657-229-3672. We had a record month of downloads last month on the podcast, almost 90,000 downloads for the month. You guys are amazing. Thanks for everything you're doing to support me, fertility education, and helping further the narrative that we deserve to understand and know about our bodies. Thank you, friends. Thank you all for listening to As a Woman. It would mean so much if you could rate, review, and follow the podcast to be notified of new episodes every Sunday. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you share it with someone in your life. Be sure to follow along on Instagram at nataliecrawfordmd and check out the YouTube channel Natalie Crawford MD. If you're interested in becoming a patient, you can also follow Fora Fertility. I'm so thrilled to have you here, part of the community that amplifies others as a woman.